Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Coming up later in the programme, as you know, drawn to some of the light relief that Mr. Ferrari managed to find in today's news agenda and tempted to return to at least one of those two stories involving train carriage etiquette in the curious case of the Manchester art removal. But we begin, as we must, with the story of Darren Osborne, the terrorist who has been found guilty of carrying out that attack in Finsbury Park, North London, last year. The court reports make for pretty grim reading because it's clear that the... Do you know, I'm feeling increasingly unable sometimes to say things on air that I want to say. And part of the reason I fear is because we all now see things differently according to whether we're talking about a white supremacist or a what would you call this guy? An Islamophobic terrorist? I don't know, or an Islamist terrorist. I will take whatever abuse you want to throw at me for saying this, but I don't find it hard to muster up some sort of sympathy for people who are brainwashed in this fashion. Obviously, in the immediate aftermath of the attack, I've told you this before, very similar to the Manchester Arena attack, actually, my sort of liberal credentials come under enormous pressure. And if the cards were to fall accordingly, I do believe in the immediate aftermath of terror attacks, particularly the Manchester one, because it involved children and it was so close to home in so many ways. I do honestly believe that I have it within me, like an awful lot of people do, to sort of tear somebody's heart out. You feel that fury rising within you. But civilization intervenes and you tamp it back down again. But when you read the court reports about this unemployed alcoholic father of four, you realise, especially if you've listened to this programme for a few years, particularly the people who've been kind enough to tell us that they've kind of undone the brainwashing. So a fellow recently, you remember, fully paid up member of the EDL, and very kindly suggested that listening to this programme had led him into a much, much better place. That and the love of a good woman. I'm not going to take all the credit myself. But when you speak to some of these people, and I occasionally sort of lift my social media blocks and mutes and filters and remind myself of what's going on in that toxic swamp, it's not hard to see how an unemployed alcoholic father of four, a man who I would typify as vulnerable and fragile, could whip himself up into a frenzy of murderous fury simply by looking at a lot of the propaganda and hate that is posted online, in some cases by people who are household names now, in the same way that Anjem Chowdhury was allowed to become a household name. I see them as identical, those figures, the people that radicalise the Islamists and the people that radicalise men like this that go and kill murderers, go and kill Muslims, go and murder Muslims. Innocent human beings are dying because these people have uncontrollable levels of anger and hatred within them. He only joined Twitter on June the 3rd. That's what was so astonishing about this story. The speed of his radicalisation was approximately 16 days. He joined Twitter on June the 3rd, looked up far-right leaders, including the former hooligan Stephen Yaxley Lennon, who calls himself Tommy Robinson, of course. And again, while I'm going all in, I wouldn't say I feel sorry for him, because if you read the court reports, the name pops up embarrassingly often. But there's a classist element to the way he gets fingered for this stuff. If he wore a chalk-striped suit and spoke in a posh accent, he would be treated very, very differently by corners of this profession. I'm not suggesting that he should be treated better. I'm suggesting that the people in chalk-striped suits with plummy accents who come out with almost identical rhetoric should be treated a lot worse, for the record. But it's the thought of somebody, because I've spoken to them, so consumed with rage that they can't really articulate, and then going online to find the evidence to inflate their rage still further. Do you remember a guy 3 or 4 years ago who told us that he genuinely believed, and so did his wife, that their marriage would have failed if he hadn't stopped looking at the laptop every 10 minutes? Again, it was EDL kind of stuff that he was doing. If you're not familiar with it, it's pretty straightforward. What you do is you attempt to portray Islam as a faith that if you follow it, you have to be a murderer, you have to be a terrorist, you have to be a paedophile. I mean, it's as old as the hills, this form of warped revisionism, using kind of carefully selected elements of the text to make claims about everybody. What is it, 1.6 billion people on the planet all want to kill you. And of course, if you don't know a lot about religion, if you haven't been raised in a faith, if you haven't been to see Mary Stuart at the Duke of York's Theatre last night and reminded yourself that in the not too distant history of these islands, you had two cousins, one signing the execution order for the other because she was the wrong sort of Christian. So, you know, the idea that you can use religion to foment and brew enormous murderous hatred is not confined to any corner of the country, any era of history, or any particular religion or faith. But I hope you don't... Here's the thing, right? If I came on air after an Islamist attack and said I felt sorry for the attackers, the roof would blow off the studio. That's what I meant by being conscious, perhaps, of censoring myself now in a way that I wouldn't have done previously. And I'm embarrassed to admit to you that I am a lot less wary of coming on air today and saying that I feel sorry for Darren Osborne. I think he's a victim. I feel a hell of a lot sorrier for the family of the man that he murdered. That goes without saying, but you don't have to pick one side and then be 100% on it. Obviously, murderers deserve very little sympathy, but that doesn't mean they don't deserve any. Well, why did this man do what he did? Because he spent 16 days in an alcoholic haze, wading through the very easily accessible cesspit of far-right internet ideology, and he came away convinced that it would be a good idea to drive a rented van into a crowd of people, completely innocent, outside a mosque in the town where I live and work. And you can draw your parallels as much as you want, although the detail is often not as complete as it is in this case. You can imagine some young Muslim lad going online, finding evidence that, you know, the appalling attacks in the Middle East upon his Muslim brothers and sisters have been sponsored and undertaken by Western governments who refuse to consider. If you just have an unleavened diet that is designed to turn you into a murderous, a furious murderer, and you get nothing else in your bloodstream, you get nothing else on your plate, you can see how perhaps using the word victim isn't as controversial. But again, I think I'd hesitate to use it if we were... I wouldn't have come on air after the Manchester attack and spoken about that man like I'm talking about this man, because... it's a terrible thing to admit, but I wonder whether even somebody with a rhinoceros thick skin like me begins eventually, by a sort of process of osmosis, to cut his cloth accordingly. It's incredible. We, on this programme, long before it was a topic of conversation every day, I found my name on a website for one of the mosques in London that was considered to be quite radical in it, and it was instructions to the followers never to ring me. Do not ring this man. He will make you sound ridiculous. He will use these tactics and these tricks. Same things happen the other way around now. And part of the reason for that was my refusal to let Anjem Choudhury anywhere near my microphone. Everywhere you looked, that little scrote was popping up on telly. I saw him. I've told you this before, and I still do a little double take to make sure my memory is working correctly. I saw him on the Alan Titchmarsh show in between the gardening slot and the wine recommendations for the weekend. And I thought that was a really good daytime television programme. I was very lucky and proud to appear on it. And it didn't really register at the time, but it registers now. They sort of bring this man on, who's currently in jail, bring this man onto a stage so that the assembled, mostly elderly people in the audience could boo him like you know, like the baddie in Aladdin. It really was just like that. And then, you know, that on this radio station, we kind of flirted, really, with having people on the payroll, past and present, who could perhaps be filed under the category of contributing to this atmosphere of hatred, this encouragement of fury. That breaking point poster was pretty gross when you think about it. The suggestion that somehow Muslim immigration was a reason to vote to leave the European Union is built entirely upon the prejudice that they must all be bad. And if they are all bad, then it makes sense to drive a van into a crowd of, doesn't it? There's no moral break in place. There's no self-examination. But for me, it's about the undiluted diet, this whole horrible story. Because in 16 days, this clearly damaged and vulnerable man found enough far-right rhetoric, speeches and hatred online to, well, radicalise is the word that's popular at the moment, to turn him into a terrorist, to turn him into a racist terrorist or an ideological terrorist or whatever. I know, you know, split hairs over what words we're going to use. And that's really scary, because it's not going to get any better in the coming years as the technology improves, is it? It can only get worse. Now, because I don't have Arabic or anything like that, I can't see the comparable stuff in quite the same way. I have to rely upon the security services. I can see videos, but I don't really like watching them, and I can see translations. But with the far-right stuff, I've been neck deep in it for half a decade, and it's actually astonishing to me that this happens so rarely. I thank my God, as I'm sure every Muslim listening thanks their God, that these attacks happen rarely, relatively rarely. But if you look at the arrests now that are being undertaken by the security services addressing extremism, the far-right end of the horseshoe is almost as big as the Islamo-fascist end of the horseshoe. And the thing I struggle with every day is how similar they are. They are so similar. So here's a Muslim man who's gone online, been exposed to videos and speeches and claims and misrepresentations of what the West stands for, and they've shown him. They've actually used the far-right stuff to radicalise him as well. They've said, look, this is what the West think of us. They say they want us to radicalise. Look how they treat Sadiq Khan. That's a little trick, by the way, for fellow fans of debagging racists. Anyone who ever gets in touch telling you that the Muslims need to integrate more, just go down their feed looking for references to Sadiq Khan. You can't get any more integrated than getting yourself elected Mayor of London in Britain, can you? But it would appear that people who claim that we need to see more integration don't really mean it. It's just a softer way of unsheathing their daggers. But if you see nothing else, what chance have you got? And that, of course, is why on both sides, your Islamo-fascists and your far-right fascists, they want to shut down the liberals. Both of them. Sorry, I probably shouldn't have said that in quite such a revelatory tone of voice. You probably worked this out for yourself years ago, but I sometimes I'm a bit late to the party. Why do you want to shut down a liberal? What's wrong with being liberal? I mean, liberals, like, great. It means you believe in freedom and being excellent to each other. Yeah, well, we don't want that. We just want people to start killing each other. And they agree. Your Islamo-fascists and your far-right fascists, they agree. They want blood to be spilt. The rest of us don't. I haven't asked you a question, and I'm already late for the break. I hesitate to ask you this because I never know quite how engaged people outside the profession are in what we do within it. I don't know how to cover this stuff anymore. I'm pretty clear that my policy of not having extremists on this programme is the right policy, but given that every other programme under the sun will invite them on, I don't know that it makes any difference to anything. So that's probably the direction we'll be going in. If you've already got the urge to speak to me, 0345 6060 973. Just want your advice, really, on how you think the media should handle these two extremes of hate-filled ideology. The far right, that is, in the case of Darren Osborne, the Finsbury Park terrorist, typified with EDL-style rhetoric, the internet sites he was visiting and the names that popped up again and again in court are sometimes, it seems, holders of season tickets for television studios. So what? I don't know what the answer is. that probably won't be the only line of conversation, and you probably want to hear some voices other than mine. So I'll remind you of the phone number and encourage you to ring in. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. It's not a debate about whether or not this man was radicalised by what he found online. It's possibly a debate about whether or not... Do you know what? Tell me whether you feel sorry for him as well. And I apologise throughout this hour for the fact that I wouldn't have had the guts to say this after an Islamist attack. Stuart's in Greenwich. Stuart, what do you think?
Hi, great show as always.
Thank you, mate.
Thoroughly enjoy it, although I'm a little bit disappointed I've missed Mystery Hour for the last 2 weeks.
Bless you, mate. We're trying to have a really serious and grown-up conversation. You're first up and you're moaning about missing Mystery Hour. It's on a podcast. Now talk to me about the grown-up stuff.
For me, I think, look, this is an issue that goes both ways, and I think lots of people, particularly in the right-wing media, feel that this is a Muslim issue. This isn't. This is an issue across the country in various different faiths and religions. And actually, I do kind of agree with you. I do have some sympathy for the people that carry out these attacks. And
would you say that? Would you have phoned me up after the Manchester Arena attack to say that? I bet you wouldn't.
No, absolutely I wouldn't. I'd have been lynched.
Yeah.
But I think the fact is, I do still have sympathy for those people also, because ultimately, I think what's happening is you've got some particularly nasty people in the world that are using their rhetoric to persuade and convince people to carry out these attacks that are generally weaker-minded people that are not having the ability to look at this from an actual level playing field and a sensible outlook to determine whether this is right or wrong. And actually, a lot of these people, there might be mitigating circumstances. This particular guy we're talking about is an alcoholic, that's obviously going to impede his judgment. He's a single father. He's probably under a massive amount of stress, and I think you can pick different things out that affect different people in different ways. And if you want to look at young Muslim boys and they're feeling persecuted by, whether it's the police, whatever you want to pick.
If I was trying to radicalise a young Muslim, I'd show them the same stuff that Darren Osborne was looking at. Actually, I think that would be more effective to say, look, this is how they think of you. Don't waste your time trying to fit in, mate. They think you're a paedophile. Don't waste your time trying to fit in. They think we're all terrorists, even though more Muslims are killed by Islamist terrorists than any other social grouping on the planet. This is what we're up against, and you could see how that might be part of a grooming process or a radicalisation process. And weirdly, the same propaganda, lies and rhetoric and hate will work upon someone who's gone to the anti-Muslim extreme. It's nuts. But and briefly, because I want to get as many voices on as possible this hour, what should happen? I know this makes me sound a bit pathetic in terms of it's such an amorphous question, but the Times goes, web giants warned. What should happen?
The honest answer is I don't know what can happen. One of the things I've said for a long time, and I think will have a impact. I'm not sure it'll have a massive impact, but it'll certainly have an impact. It's how it's reported. Now, when these sort of attacks are carried out, it's called a terrorist attack. The truth, from my point of view, is it's not. It's a cowardly attack. These people are going to attack people that are unarmed.
No one's going to argue with that. Whether it's at London Bridge or whether it's at the Manchester Arena or whether it's Finsbury Park or whether it's Joe Cox, it's incredible cowardice. But look, if you were a Muslim and they decided to use this one as the beginning of not calling it terrorism, you'd get an understandable hump. My colleague and friend Rachel Venables, who is just a first-class journalist and utterly without an offensive or a provocative bone in her body, professionally speaking. She simply reported yesterday about this terrorist being convicted for murder and how the court heard he'd been radicalised in fewer than 3 weeks by the far-right propaganda and Islamophobia that she found online. Have a look at her Twitter feed to see some of the tweets she got back. She reports upon the radicalisation of a man who went on to kill or tried to kill Muslims, succeeded in killing one, and she gets back an avalanche of anti-Muslim radicalising propaganda, precisely the sort of stuff that apparently spurred this Darren Osborne guy on. And I am utterly baffled as to what the answer is to this. I know what the first step to the answer is. First step is, oddly, recognising that there are two sides here, but not in the binary way that many people... Well, two sides are always going to be binary, but it's not Muslims and everybody else. It's terrorists, their supporters, their promoters, their encouragers, their preachers, and everybody else. and that means that your far-right freak shows are in exactly the same cage as your mad mullahs, and it's the rest of us who are outside it. Paul's in Sheffield. Paul, what do you think?
Good morning, James.
Hello,
it's just a little bit, well, an observation, if you like, regarding the disparity in relation to how we look at, I beg your pardon, Islamist terror, and also, you know, what we describe. I know they both meet eventually, but far-right terror.
Yeah.
I think for so long we've tracked these right-wing extremists as a little bit of a joke in respect to the fact that not yourself, and I would point that out, but other programmes, TV programmes, etc. Say, for example, they cover an EDL march.
Yeah.
It seems like they go out of the way to find the most ill-educated, inarticulate person. And you think, goodness me, what a bunch of jokers. Now, sadly, after Finsbury Mosque and Joe Colt, we're starting to look at them in a different way. They're not a bunch of ill-educated buffoons, but we seem to believe that now. And as you mentioned, I think tides starting to change a little bit in respect to the fact that these are very dangerous people, and they're no different, as you rightly say. But the coverage they get has always seemed to be, you could always
That's really interesting. I don't agree with you. But I don't know that I'm right not to agree with you, because for me, the people you describe brilliantly are the ones that perhaps go viral with the clips among what I'm going to describe unapologetically as decent people, where, you know, there is a slightly unpleasant tendency to laugh at the epic stupidity that is displayed by people suggesting that they're on an EDL march because they're frightened of Muslimic ray guns, which is one I can remember. But the leaders... They're popping up on Newsnight. They're not being treated like a joke. This was my theory with Anjem Chowdhury, my point and laugh theory about everyone from Omar Bakri Mohammed onwards. And I still think that if the rest of the media had done what I did and treat them like inadequate idiots who really need a girlfriend, or, you know, unreconstructed former football hooligans with a rap sheet as long as your arm, treat them like the idiots they are, and the followers won't come to them, and the vulnerable men like Darren Osborne won't fall under their spell. Treat them like sort of serious, frightening figures. Treat Anjem Chowdhury like a pantomime villain, and before you know it, he's a real villain. So that's my perspective. That's why I don't necessarily agree with you.
But James, sorry, I beg your pardon.
No.
Do you remember when Nick Griffin appeared on Question Time?
Yes.
And it was basically laughed off, and that was it, end of him. So by giving him a platform, we saw how ridiculous. But
he wasn't a very good demagogue, Paul. That's why he was laughed off. He wasn't very good at it. No, some of them are much better at it.
Yeah,
you know, unveiling their posters and making their big video speeches. So Nick Griffin was just a rubbish racist, mate.
Yes, but before he appeared on there, how many people would you think, oh, yes, I agree with his views, etc., etc.? You see him on there, and he looked a complete clown.
But then the more successful racists have enjoyed astonishing prominence in the British media.
Yeah.
So that's my problem, is that if it's Nick Griffin, treat him like that. With the others, don't put them on Question Time. Don't put them in places that should be reserved for respectable people.
And I guess the big point is here, and this is not any kind of snobbery, but the people who watch Question Time, and not the ones who I guess would go on an EDL march when the football season's come to an end.
No, and that's part of it, but I tell you who will watch it and go on an EDL march, people who are watching little out-of-context clips from all of these programmes on the internet, which is going to be a bigger constituency now than people watching television programmes from beginning to end. I suspect we're both a bit right on that, Paul, but I do honestly believe, and I've never been persuaded from this position, from the very first time I sat behind this microphone, and it was that phrase, of course I condemn it, but, and then people would go on to describe Western foreign policy, and I used to scream at them. I used to get very angry on air, believe it or not. It's like, there is no but when you've just condemned a terror attack. There's no but, whether it was September the 11th or the July the 7th attacks in this city. And that's gone now. I don't know whether it's gone underground, but I don't get that anymore. You know, the idea that there's any rationale or justification for these sort of attacks, especially when you realise that you could be the next one to be attacked, whatever your religion, your background, or your relationship with the Middle East might be. That went away, but it hasn't gone away from the far right. Social media is full today of people essentially unveiling their terrorist sympathiser credentials, and yet before this verdict dropped yesterday, terrorist sympathiser would have been their idea of the worst possible insult you could throw at someone. And yet there they are today doing it. What's changed? The colour of the terrorist. I'll share some of the Daily Mail's coverage of it with you, because I've made no secret of what I feel about this newspaper and their role in encouraging far-right tendencies in this country. So just to sort of highlight some of these facts reported in court in a way that would be immune to perhaps some of the things you could accuse me of if I was reading from The Guardian, perhaps. Osborne, who was not technically competent, used phones and laptops belonging to his estranged wife Sarah Andrews and children to search Google, Twitter and Facebook. A fortnight before the attack, he asked Mrs. Andrews to set up a Twitter account for him so he could follow the far-right extremists. After following Franson and Robinson, that's the woman from Britain First and the Stephen Yaxley Lennon, he received emails asking him to attend a march in Manchester and contribute to a campaign legal fund. It always ends with a begging bowl with these outfits, the far-right people. Always, always, always. I presume with the Islamo-fascists as well, they're always trying to raise money, but it's incredible how quickly the begging bowl comes out, asking credulous followers to give them money, which is preferable to, of course, any of the other paths of action that they could follow. At the heart of these activities was the Twitter account of Robinson, who he searched for 34 times in the days before his attack. Twitter deleted the accounts of Franson and fellow Britain First leader Paul Golding in December after their posts were shared with millions by Donald Trump. But Robinson, arguably Britain's leading far-right poster boy, continues to command almost 400,000 followers on the platform. You see, he's not Britain's leading far-right poster boy. Britain's leading far-right poster boy is the boy who unveils posters espousing far-right policies. But because Robinson is a little rough around the edges and not possessed of sort of clothes that he's based upon his idea of what a gamekeeper might look like in the 1950s. He's Britain's far-right poster. It can't be people that went to private school. It can't be people that the Daily Mail high command consider to be a bit like them. It has to be Robinson. And I know that he cropped up in court a lot more than anybody else. But that lazy labelling, far-right poster boy, I believe he's a bad influence upon this country. I believe he is an extremist, but I do not believe he deserves to be singled out from the people who have a rather more middle-class demeanour. In one message referring to the Manchester bombing, Robinson wrote, "Where was the day of rage after the terrorist attacks? All I saw was lighting candles." And in another he wrote, "Anger when a Muslim bombed our kids. We were told not to look back in anger." Osborne appeared to parrot these lines in his own propaganda letter, asking where was the public outrage at the Muslim sex grooming scandal. And do you know what, actually, while we're on the subject, and while I'm probably talking more and listening less than I usually would, because this really does intrigue me, didn't David Cameron call Jeremy Corbyn a terrorist sympathiser? It's a very, very loaded word to use in the House of Commons. I'm pretty sure I've heard senior Conservatives describe Jeremy Corbyn thus. And Jeremy Corbyn, of course, was on Darren Osborne's hit list. Something that surprised even me, with my well-documented disdain for the Daily Mail and everything it's done to this country, was the fact that they were having a pop at Lily Allen while this trial was still unfolding. And Lily Allen found out from newspaper coverage that this man had addressed notes to her that were found in his van by the police. The police didn't tell her. She found out after it had come out in court. There was no warning, and it didn't even stop. Knowing that, because if I knew it, they jolly well did. They still ran a couple of stories in the course of the last 2 weeks designed to whip up more hatred against Lily Allen. It's a sort of young mother in her 30s. It's just nuts. But to try to pass it all off on Tommy Robinson, I'm not buying it. I'm not buying it. Chris is in Reading. Chris, what do you think?
Well, basically, I think a lot of it is also government and liberal media's fault, and I'll tell you for why. The Bradford girls and the Rochdale girls, basically, if the people that had attacked her had been dealt with correctly, this wouldn't have gone as far. The programme wouldn't have happened. And basically... So
you realise this is the equivalent to someone ringing me and saying if Britain wasn't bombing Iraq, we wouldn't have had July the 7th?
Well, let me put it a different way now. And
no, let's go with the way you've put it. You are essentially justifying terrorism.
Well, I'm not, because the guy is an angry nutter, and he got angry.
So were the July the 7th bombers. But a lot of people would have rung me back in the day and said, you need to look at the foreign policy, and you're saying you need to look at the grooming events, which were prosecuted. I'm not patronising you now, but I don't think you haven't read the report.
They allowed it to happen. It was allowed to happen for a long time. The programme went onto the media.
And so you're aware of the court case unfolding at the moment involving a football coach. You're aware of the child sex abuse inquiry that's looking at pretty much every private school in the country. You're aware of the swimming coaches. But why only care about this one?
Naz Shah was retweeted that the Rochdale girls should keep their mouths shut. She is in the opposition. Do you not think that's going to annoy people?
It annoys me. If it's as you reported, it annoys me. But you're now justifying terrorism, Chris.
About it.
Stop.
I'm not justifying it, mate. I'm not.
Yes, you are.
I'm not justifying. I'm not.
Well, why have you mentioned it, Chris?
Well, because I'm saying that some people will get very annoyed and act upon it, and most people won't.
Yes. So what are you saying about the some people? Why have you mentioned this stuff if you're not in some way suggesting that that's the real cause of terrorism?
Well, no, because you're suggesting that the right wing are causing it. They're just a reaction.
No, I'm reading out the court. I'm reading out the court report.
No, well, so that makes it absolutely right, does it?
Yes.
We don't have to question.
If we're discussing what happened in court, then reading out the court report is pretty reliable. Yes. So let's just examine why you don't recognise that you are now the, if you will, the right-wing equivalent of the Muslim caller telling me that you can't really look at the July the 7th attacks or September the 11th without looking at Western foreign policy in the Middle East. And I used to get very cross with them because it seems to me that there's never any justification for going out and murdering innocent people. You phoned me up to tell me that there is a justification.
No, there's no justification for it.
Would you like to apologise on his behalf?
No.
Why not?
I didn't. Because I don't kill anybody.
Would you like to apologise as a fellow white person?
No.
Why not?
Because I didn't do anything.
But whenever there's an Islamist attack, I'm bombarded by people telling me that all Muslims need to apologise or they need to. What are you doing at the moment to root out far right ideology in your community, Chris?
Yeah, but
it's not a trick question. What do you do? Because you clearly know a lot about it, because you phone me up with all these details. What are you doing at the moment to combat far-right ideology that could radicalise people like this?
What are you doing?
Talking to you, mate. Talking to you.
Why didn't you go about Naz Shah?
Because I'm not interested in a Labour MP's Twitter account. I'm interested in the actions of a murderer.
No, that's right. Of course you wouldn't go on about Naz Shah, because it's not in your... Naz Shah retweeted that the girls in Rotherham should keep their mouths shut.
Well, that's disgusting.
Donald Trump.
That's disgusting, Chris.
A programme on it.
A programme on a Labour MP's tweet when we're talking about someone who's been murdered.
About Donald Trump.
Okay, so I'll ask you again.
You learned all about Donald Trump, mate, didn't you?
I do talk a lot about Donald Trump. Yes, he's the leader of the free world. Naz Shah is a recently arrived Labour MP who has clearly, if you're telling me something correct, she's done something incredibly stupid. I agree with you. Now answer my question.
Why haven't you done a programme on it, mate?
Well, because no one's going to disagree, Chris.
No, because the Liberals don't want to, do they?
Now, Chris, here's the thing, right? OK, let's do it this way. Here is, if Chris has described this Twitter activity correctly, I think it's utterly disgusting. Ring me now if you don't. That's how it would work. Everybody thinks it's disgusting, Chris. You've got a victim mentality.
To be fair, no. The only person who mentioned it was Mashid Noir, and fair play to him, because he's got the balls to talk about this stuff.
But we're talking about it now. I'm agreeing with everything you've said, Chris. What is wrong with your ears?
Well, no, because you're trying to twist it that I'm a terrorist.
No, I'm asking what you've done to tackle the far-right ideology that you have such an understanding of within your own community. What are you doing to battle this radicalisation process?
No, what are the government doing about it? What are the government
not enough.
Look, have you seen the Stacey Dooley in Luton?
Not enough, Chris. Mate, I can't go through your back catalogue of recorded programmes and Twitter analysis.
No,
I'm asking you what you have done.
Nonsense.
Please let me ask a question that you'll answer.
What have I done about right-wing radicalisation?
Yes.
No, I'll tell you what. I didn't know about Tommy Robinson till the Manchester attack, and I'll tell you why.
What have you done? What have you done, though?
I haven't done anything.
Why not?
It's not for me to do, mate.
But you know so much about it. You're so clear on what causes it. Surely you could help fight this radicalisation process.
22 children and adults get blown up, and the mosque that guy went to actually said that Western society is immoral.
So you're justifying it again and you don't even realise.
I'm not justifying it, mate.
So why are you telling me about this stuff then?
So what I'm saying is the liberal media and the government haven't done
What
enough
is the
to
liberal
stand
media,
out.
Chris? When you say the liberal
people like
media?
you.
Yes, but I know me. But who else?
Well, Channel 4 News, the very day afterwards.
Channel 4 News.
Channel 4 News was saying the atmosphere's amazing. It's like a festival, like we don't have enough festivals in this country.
Chris, what are you talking about now? The day after what?
Channel 4 News, after the Manchester bomb, they were saying what an amazing atmosphere it was.
An atmosphere of recovery and peace. That they were interviewing people who were there and reflecting on what they were finding.
No, not the parents, mate. The parents were quiet.
Well, I've had the parents in this studio. I've had Martin Hett's mum and dad sitting here describing to me how the one thing that... Pardon?
Not all of them. No one.
I can't have all of them in the studio. I can only invite the ones in that have asked to come in. Chris, I apologise that I can't issue an invitation to everybody. So apart from me and Channel 4 News, Chris, I'm not gonna have a row with you. I want to get inside your thinking. I don't want to fight with you or shout at you. What else is the liberal media? When you say the liberal media, I mean, on this programme, with regard to the grooming gangs that you mentioned in the north of England, we went in first and we went in hard on that story. And we have repeatedly shared, I say we, I'm sounding like the Queen, I have repeatedly shared my theory that it has a lot to do with entrenched misogynistic attitudes that are inculcated in cultures that are coming from specific parts of the Middle East. I can say that out loud a billion times. Is that liberal media?
It's also an underlying sort of awareness. I mean, I know, for instance...
Is that liberal media, Chris? When I say all that stuff about misogyny and inculcation and it having cultural and geographical roots, is that liberal media or is that stuff you like to hear?
No, basically, it's the fact that so much is just whitewashed.
It's not, though, is it? But you've just used me as your best example of liberal media, and your best example of things being ignored is something I've talked about repeatedly in the most castigating of terms. So something's gone wrong between my mouth and your ear, and something went wrong between...
Well, I don't listen to every single programme you do.
Between Darren... No, you're too busy looking at Naz Shah's Twitter account and recording Channel 4 News. So we'll ask again... Let me ask again... What are you doing to combat this far-right ideology that you have quite a good understanding of?
No, the far-right, people like Tommy Robinson are a reaction to his upbringing and to what has happened in this country and the backlash to it. So the fault is the government not tackling it.
OK. Not tackling what, Chris?
Not tackling things like Sharia law being trying.
So again, you think that this act of terrorism is a result of something other than the terrorist. It's a result, just in the same way that people say the bombing in the Middle East was what caused September the 11th and July the 7th. You think that Darren Osborne becoming a terrorist was a result of things that Muslims do? Sikhs
that I know of that are not happy with the situation in this country, educated
and that is Darren Osborne, mate. It's just a question of where that unhappiness takes you. It's 10:51. I'm 6 minutes late for the break, Chris. I hope you feel you've had a fair crack of the whip. And just on a very personal level, you can just say what you like about me, but you have to also at some point recognise reality. So the grooming gangs that you used as your example of where the liberal media are somehow letting the country down were covered on this programme pretty much from the moment Andrew Norfolk started reporting it in the Times, and the amount of complaints we got about concluding and stating that there were cultural and geographical roots to this behaviour. The line I always use, my friend, is how the hell I can just about get my head around one scumbag doing this, but how the hell could you turn to your colleagues or your mates and say, oh, do you want to join in? That speaks to me of a community problem. I can say it until I'm blue in the face, Chris, and people like you will never hear it. And that, I'm afraid, is a sign of being radicalised. We'll stay with this for a bit longer, and I'm grateful to Chris for ringing in. And I'll tell you, if you're not across the story that he referred to, exactly what he was talking about. A Labour MP has been criticised for sharing a Twitter post telling Rotherham sex abuse victims to shut their mouths for the good of diversity. Naz Shah, who represents Bradford West, shared and liked a post tweeted out from a parody account of newspaper columnist Owen Jones. The 43-year-old later deleted her tweet and unliked the post, I think within a matter of minutes. But if you wanted to, you could clearly take that as evidence that she was unmoved by the abuse of hundreds of girls in the north of England. You could, if you wanted to. And I'm a little uncomfortable now that Chris has gone speculating, but if you were accessing the sort of websites that Darren Osborne was accessing, that to you would seem like the biggest story in town. It really would, because they would be weighing in on it so much, like the so-called no-go zones, and like the, the idea that halal, which sort of apes the modes of slaughter that humankind has been employing for most of the last 2,000 years, has suddenly become something awful. That's the point about an unleavened diet. So I think what he found confusing was the fact that I can read that. I don't believe anybody in Parliament particularly would be stupid enough to somehow do what he thought she did, which is laugh at the victims. I suspect that she was retweeting a joke, which is clearly what it is from a parody account, taking the mickey out of people like Owen Jones, and it's too nuanced to explain. But I mean, you can talk about it. It's a tweet from a Labour MP that got deleted very quickly. That's all there is to talk about. And then you can speculate about why she did it, and whatever you come up with, she's going to come out of it badly, but she either comes out of it as someone who laughs at victims of child sex abuse, which is just unfeasible, or she comes out of it as someone who's been a bit stupid on Twitter. I've liked stuff by accident in the past when your thumb slips, but to like it and retweet it, I don't know that does happen by accident personally. There you go, the liberal media just talked about it. Mate, the liberal media just talked about it. Why haven't you done a whole show on it? How do you know I haven't? You said you're at work usually. I haven't done a whole show on it because I now have nothing else to say about this. But if you go onto these websites or you look at the social media accounts of these people, that they literally can't talk about anything else ever. And it's not about terrorists. It's about trying to portray people who've never done anything wrong as being complicit in the behaviour of people who have. So someone rings me up to say, I'm very sorry about all those people that died in London on July the 7th, but Western foreign policy in the mid, and I want to tear their heads off, metaphorically speaking, at that point, because there is no but. A man drives a van into a crowd of Muslims coming out of Mosque at Ramadan because he's been indoctrinated by right-wing websites and social media. There is no but. You're the same. You're the same person spouting the same ideas. Well, I mean, obviously it's bad that it happened, but foreign policy in the Middle East. Well, obviously it's bad that it happened, but liberal media and Naz Shah. There is no but. We've got to get this clear, haven't we? Everybody has to understand this, otherwise it's going to get a hell of a lot worse in a whole heap of ways. Stay with this for a little longer, because, as I said at the very outset, I'm not quite sure what we should be doing now that we know those predictions have come true, the predictions that the rise in toxic, unchallenged, dishonest, utterly undiluted hatred from far-right or white supremacist organisations in this country would eventually see blood spilt on our streets, just as the Islamo-fascists or the extremists or the Islamists or whatever you prefer to call them, being able to operate in the shadows of the internet, have similarly persuaded people to go out and commit murders, to go out and commit acts of terror. And you know, if you listen to the programme even occasionally, that to me they're two cheeks of the same backside. They really are. And yet then, you know, you take a call from someone like Chris discussing a convicted terrorist murderer, and he genuinely, and I'm not, I mean, look, I'm criticising him, I suppose, but I'm not condemning him or shutting him down. But to phone up and say, what about Naz Shah? It's almost beyond comprehension, unless you look at this stuff, where you can spend 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, being whipped up into a state of righteous outrage about those disgusting crimes in the north of England without once stopping to wonder why no one ever mentions all of the other child sex abuse cases unfolding up and down the country every flipping day. Without stopping to wonder, well, hang on a minute, a Labour MP tweeted something unpleasant and stupid, hopefully because she was misguided, possibly because she was being unpleasant and stupid, and then she deleted it. And that should be leading our news. That should be a topic of conversation for an hour on the radio on a day that we're discussing a terrorist murder. That's what happens when you never hear the other side. So where does that leave my conviction that we shouldn't actually talk to the ringleaders, the Anjem Chowdhuries, the Stephen Yaxley-Lennons, that they don't deserve the oxygen of decency, I don't know. A couple of phone lines free. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. And I'm putting something else out there. You can respond to this. I don't know who would be best qualified. You see it a lot with Brexit, oddly, now, is that people prefer being lied to. But on this one, it's the thing that, if you will, liberals find really hard to compute, and I'd like help in computing it, is the active desire to be outraged. Outrage is the wrong word. The active desire to be furious all the time. Because you can ring me and I can pop a couple of your balloons and you don't go, oh yeah, well, there's clearly cause for concern here, but I probably shouldn't be spending my entire life raging and raving about it. That's not healthy and it's not good, and there are lots of other problems in the world that we can't file under this particular category. But people like it. It's as if it feeds something inside them. I've seen it with a very, very good friend of mine, and I have his permission to talk to you without identifying him, but he fell under the spell of the EDL, and I spent 6 months dealing with it and actually trying to have conversations with him, and he'd show me stuff that he'd found on YouTube featuring there was one American fellow in particular, an American chap of colour, I can't remember his name, but he gave all these brilliant speeches, and he'd show me the blogs in The Spectator, and he'd show me the articles on the websites, and he'd be utterly persuaded that all Muslims are somehow complicit, all Muslims are somehow bad. And then the no-go zones. He showed me something written by an American white supremacist about no-go zones in London. So we went there. We went to Tower Hamlets. And we kept waiting to be told we weren't allowed into all the various different bits. And I mean, he ended up a little bit poorly, and as part of his recovery process, he was told to leave all this stuff alone. And he did, and he got better. So why? Why do they want it? If you're passing the begging bowl around, or you're getting hired to appear on Sky News or LBC or wherever it may be, then I understand why you do it. I think it's gross. But if you're just sitting at home feeling furious, you're a Muslim logging on to ISIS videos, feeling furious, feeding the hatred, feeding the anger. Or you're a white bloke in Wales logging on to the far-right videos, looking for more reasons to be furious, until eventually you snap and you go out and kill innocent people. Why? And how do we, you and me, tackle it? Jane is in Milton Keynes. Jane, what do you think?
Hello, yes. Well, I'm not racial, I'm impartial to everything, and I have quite liberal views on certain things. But I feel the problem that is happening now at the moment, and I'm a bit annoyed about certain things that I see on Facebook and blah, blah, blah. But basically, I don't think the government have done enough, and the media has certainly whipped up the frenzy that seems to be going on at the moment with the separation of the two cultures, if you like.
Yes. There isn't a separation of the two cultures, but we're constantly being told that there is.
We're constantly reminded there is.
There are terrorists, murderers, scumbags, and the people that encourage and promote them or apologise them, and I apologise to Chris for this, the people who try to justify the actions of terrorists, and then there's everybody else. Those are the two cultures, and yet it's being sold to us as something very different and much uglier.
Yes, but I believe it is going to get a lot uglier. That's the thing, and I think the government need to. I think the British people and the British public do not have a problem with migration and everything that happens over here.
Well, I think they do, but for the wrong reasons.
Well, yeah, but culturally, I think people are scared that they're losing Britain because you can have different laws, or they're being told you can have different laws.
But it's so easy. This is where I don't know what the role of the media should be, because you sell more tickets enforcing it, endorsing it, encouraging it. You sell more tickets writing a column in the Daily Mail. You make a lot more money writing a column for the Daily Mail than you do doing what I do, telling people that this is, they're just around the corner, they're coming to get you, they're nicking your biscuits, it's all the fault of the immigrants, down with those Muslims, grrr. But then when I speak to...
job to think, you know what, I'm going to stop this.
Yes, I don't know who will do that. And the weird thing is, when people ring me...
Osborne thought he'd try.
Yeah.
You know, so you're whipping up more we have got a lot of unstable people in our society now because we don't have the facilities to put them into places to de-radicalise them.
That's also true.
So they're out on the street.
That's also true. And
it's a governmental problem which they should have sorted out 20, 30 years ago. Maybe too late now.
Do you know? Do you remember when we had the slightly comical sight of Sinn Féin figures having their voices dubbed on British television?
Yeah.
I now understand why Margaret Thatcher did that.
Yeah. We are too soft on everybody.
Oh, I don't know that I mean that necessarily. I just mean giving oxygen to indecent people and indecent positions because it sells tickets, it gets clicks, it gets ratings. That is what I mean by softness. We don't have a moral robustness in this country that can say that's beyond the pale.
No, we don't have anyone, as Margaret Thatcher standing in any government at the moment, that've got the backbone to say, do you know what? No, you're not going to have this.
Get off my radio. Get off my television. You write another newspaper column like that, but then perhaps we sound like we're restricting freedoms of speech.
Well, then, yeah. So then you upset the Liberals.
You upset the Liberals. You upset some of the Liberals, but you also upset the extremists. So that's the weird.
I have a fear for future grandchildren.
Yes.
If this is a society, when you hear of people, there is no-go zones, because I did a bit of work in London and I ended up on this housing estate and I didn't realise the housing estate I was on. I called the police because I got assaulted on that estate and they didn't come.
Well, I accept your story. I remind you of the scale of police cuts.
No. Riot. Naively.
Okay. I take that on measure, but obviously we're in touch with the Metropolitan Police on a daily basis. They would completely dispute that version of events, and quite how you end up in the middle of a housing estate by accident is obviously a story for another day, Jane.
And I'm a bit naive, a bit green, live in Milton Keynes, you know. So
yes, I do know.
Doing my job, knock on the door, I get abused, phone up the police, and they didn't come. And then someone told me later, you do realise where you were.
Someone told you later. I was going to say, I very, very much doubt that the police told you that. Last time I got burgled, the police didn't come. It's perhaps a reflection more of austerity policies than it is of anything that fits in with what somebody told you later. It's 11:13. Although, again, if you want me to put a call into the Metropolitan Police Press Office and ask whether or not they routinely fail to attend because they're frightened of provoking a reaction from people in the area, I will do so. I've done it before, I'll do it again. Isaac's in Caterham. Isaac, what's going on?
Hi, thanks for having me.
You're welcome.
I'm calling in to basically not, justify anything. I think that a lot of people are calling in to justify that this man who drove a van into a crowd of people outside of, Mosque or wherever in East London.
Only one person has done that on this programme. I imagine it's happened elsewhere on the station, and we can typify it very loosely as saying he did it because those Muslims are so awful, and some of them will add they deserved it, and some of them won't.
Absolutely, and the thing is, I hear conversations in my workplace. I'm from a mixed background, black and white, so I'd say in work, a lot of people probably mistake the fact that I'm actually biracial, and I hear the conversations at work, and a lot of people would, think, we need to, like you say, fueling the anger with, going on the Facebook threads of, allowing their internet history and cookies to dictate where they go and what they view online, and it kind of fuels their anger towards this select group of people when, you have to look at the broader picture and, who's actually putting those stories out there and what's actually, what the agenda is behind it. I mean, I don't know. A lot of it is covered up, and I think that a lot of people out there need each other in terms of immigration because at the end of the day, nobody wants to,
But will you and I ever...
No one wants to build their own...
Will you and I ever understand it? The desire to feel this way, because it involves choice. There's no doubt about that. If it didn't involve choice, everybody would feel the same way. Do we waste our time trying to understand? Trying to understand an Islamist terrorist is a lot harder for me and probably for you because I don't have the same cultural comparison points. I don't have the same languages. But to understand a white supremacist, a far-right person, is almost impossible because, like you, I just keep coming up against a determination to believe things that are demonstrably untrue.
We need to remember the history, of this country and others, and how, for example, the Muslims and brown people in general, they class them as Muslims or Indian or whatever. How many million Indians and Muslims fought for Britain in both of the world wars and the history of the
I don't think that matters because that involves digging and depth. And look, here is something that I've cut and pasted from the Quran that appears to suggest that every Muslim in the world wants to kill you. I'm going to choose to believe that instead. No, I'm not going to. I don't care about all the Muslims that died on our side in World War II. I don't care about all the the Sikh Spitfire pilots. Here's a brown person. Here's a weird little cut and paste from the Quran. There you go. They all want to kill us. So I'm going to go and hire a van and drive it into a crowd full of people outside a mosque in Finsbury Park.
Exactly, and I think that the fact that people allow their internet history, because everybody has the ability to turn off cookies. For example, if you look at something that's very, very far right, the internet picks up that you've seen it, because I get suggested things that I'm searching all the time. For example, I want to buy a new watch, and I've been looking at watches. I get email from the watch shop.
Yeah, this is it, isn't it?
Have a look at that. So when they're looking at these far right, movement pages or whatever, they're getting suggested other things similar to what they're looking at. So I think that a lot of people obviously need to do a lot of history, digging in history and look at the fact that, I know I'm arguing with everyone today. A little bit of history can go a very long way. But actually, I think, and I think I'm comfortable saying this, that if Darren Osborne had gone along to that mosque in Finsbury Park on a day when it was open to everybody to come in and have their preconceptions challenged, it could have ended a lot better. Rather than going to the history books, just go, it sounds so crass, just go and talk to some Muslim people. And the lads have put out a clip claiming that my explanation of the rise of far-right terrorism is bang on the money. And one of the earlier replies to come in is from someone on Twitter, not blocked by us. Does this not say it's all what a moron this guy is? And it links to a tweet that tells us Jews control the Federal Reserve, Jews control all 6 major Hollywood studios, Jews control most TV programming, Jews control most advertising. And we're having a conversation about a terrorist who killed Muslims. So I think if there is anything we could mostly agree needs to be done to stop another Darren Osborne or another Manchester Arena or another Thomas Mayer, Joe Cox's murderer, or another London Bridge terror attack, then it would be to recognise the similarities. Why would Islamophobia go hand in hand with anti-Semitism, given that the political situation in the Middle East sees an awful lot of people who are Jewish feel very threatened by an awful lot of people who are Muslim, and vice versa. So what's going on there? Why bring Jews into it? With 34% rise in anti-Semitic reports, Labour Party's got a big problem with this. I know it upsets some of you when I say that, but it really does. And until I get the chance to sit down with a leader and ask him what's going on, I can only go by what I'm being told and what I'm reading and learning, and it looks bad. So no one gets a free pass on any of this. It's surely, though, the only way you can start to protect a community from extremists is to distinguish the community from the extremists, which is why when someone rings in and says, well, I condemn the attacks, but you need to look at the West's Middle East policies, you need to look at foreign policy in Iraq or Syria or whatever it may be, that is not separating the extremists from the community. That is trying to let some of the extremism seep into the community. So you can condemn in the most unrestricted of terms the policies adopted by Western governments in the Middle East, but it never admits or allows terrorism. You can find the British policies in Ireland to be abhorrent, but you never come down on the same side as the argument as the IRA. You can find the depictions of Muslim people in the British media utterly, utterly offensive. But you never take up arms against innocent people as a result. And I don't know why that is so hard to grasp until we can unravel this simple question of why do you choose to be furious when it's so easy not to be? All you need to dilute your fury is facts. And then the internet steps up, provides what, of course, Donald Trump's press secretary Kellyanne Conway has now termed alternative facts, by which we mean lies,
and you can feed your fury with the lies, and the facts never get close, because your news algorithms now, if you've shown an interest in one video by a racist knuckle dragger or by a chalk-striped hate preacher, your news feed's going to fill up with hundreds more of them. And that's, I think, what happens to callers like Chris earlier. Matthew's in Romford. Matthew, what do you think?
Hello, James.
Hello, mate.
I mean, first of all, I would not lump you in with the critique I'm going to make of certain quarters of the liberal media, because I think you are generally very impartial.
I'm not impartial at all. What do you mean by liberal media, do you think?
So, well, let me go back. Not necessarily liberal media, perhaps certain liberal...
It's really important that we know what we mean by the words that we use, because I'm confused on this issue, all of these issues.
Let me give an example.
Yeah.
So, Majid Nawaz, your colleague,
yes.
Someone I think deserves incredible admiration and respect. Very brave, have been on an incredible journey. He's been branded as a hate extremist by the Southern Law Poverty Centre in the United States.
Yes.
Because of...
Majid will be with you this weekend, by the way, on LBC on Saturday and Sunday. It's I shouldn't tell anyone this because it's not good for the ego, but it's my mum's second favourite show on LBC. Anyway, carry on, man.
It's Nick Ferrari.
No, the other fellow with the same initials. Go on, carry on, Matthew.
Sorry. He's because he speaks uncomfortable because he speaks uncomfortable truths. And I think that there is a bit of a trend.
So, again, people would dispute that. I mean, the other people would say they're not truths. So he says things that... I mean, he was in... at one point, didn't he invite Tommy Robinson into his organisation?
He sort of offered him...
Yeah, so you could perhaps see why some other Muslim people would feel that wasn't necessarily helpful or conducive to building community relations. So... and also, Majid's perfectly capable of talking to you himself about anything he's ever said or done. I got nothing but respect for the guy. Liberal media is where you started. And you seem to be suggesting that there's... Well, I presume that you're moving towards the suggestion that you feel there's an imbalance in media coverage.
I feel like when one of these incidents, like the right-wing incidents happen, there's a kind of rush to almost draw as if there's a kind of equivalence, as if it's a like for like in terms of the scale of the problem.
Well, no, you can't do that, can you? Because you just count.
Well, exactly, yes.
In terms of the actual terrorist attacks, you can just count. So I've never heard anyone claim that 52 people killed in London is the same as on 7/7 is the same as one person killed in Finsbury Park. But what you're really comparing is the effectiveness of terrorism. This chap in Finsbury Park wanted to kill loads more. So counting is partly relevant to the analysis of the situation, but there's a lot more to it than mere counting. The police warned after this verdict yesterday that far-right violent extremism is higher now than at any point it has been in this country since the Second World War. And you're sort of suggesting that we're paying it too much attention.
I'm suggesting that we're talking about two very different issues, actually. We're talking about one issue where it seems that we've got one which is the right-wing knuckle draggers.
We want to drop that. I know I've used that phrase myself, but I do believe more damage is done by the posh ones.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you could say that they both are like that. Yeah, I find myself torn because I consider myself very liberal in the way that I look at things. But at the same time, I can't escape the notion that when you look at the facts, like the Trevor Phillips survey that came out a little while ago, the research from the Quilliam Foundation, that there are, it seems disproportionate, the amount of sort of hardline, ultra-conservative views within certain, largely it seems some of the areas of the Islamic community, or shall we say...
So we need to be stronger on all ultra-conservative views then?
I think it's more about calling it, because what it seems to happen is that you get outliers on all sides of the spectrum, don't you? So, like the point that you made, not everybody that necessarily thinks that there's an issue with Islamic immigration or integration with society is going to go and hire a van and go and drive it down to...
No, I just wonder if you could share some of your liberal credentials with me.
Go on. What do you mean?
Well, you just said you're a very liberal person, but you struggle sometimes. So what do you mean by liberal in that context?
Well, I believe in people having the right to practice their religion, and I also believe in the right to be able to challenge people. And if there's something which I think that people should have the fundamental. I think children in particular should be brought up in an environment where. So, for instance, even though I consider myself liberal, I don't really agree with the notion of faith schools, for instance. I don't think that has any...
I think that fits. I think you can have a problem with faith schools and still be liberal. I'm just sort of, and I don't want to misrepresent you, I'm just sensing that you probably spend a little bit more time being slightly illiberal about Islamic issues than you do about other issues.
No, I'm against anything which I would consider to be either totalitarian. That could be...
But you began by describing the liberal media as if you thought that was a bad thing.
I described certain strands of the liberal media...
Because I've only got me so far on what do you mean by liberal media? Because, I mean, you look at the Mail, you look at the Sun, you look at the Telegraph, you look at the Express, you look at most of the prominent pundits and columnists, most of the social media players. Where is the liberal media? It's a very lonely place, Matthew, I've got to tell you.
The BBC
is a model of impartiality. I had to resign from the BBC in order to say on this programme things like what I've said to you today. It's the opposite.
I don't. There is almost certain in much of their programming. There's probably, in fact, over Brexit, they've started to become a little bit. They've almost.
Why is Brexit a liberal or illiberal issue?
Well, no, that is in they've started. They were initially very, very negative towards Brexit, and now they're attempting.
But what's that got to do with liberalism?
It isn't. I'm just saying that.
So what do you mean when you say liberal media?
The left of centre, shall I say? I'm not saying it's far left.
But Jeremy Corbyn has been pro-Brexit all of his life. It's not a left-right issue. You see, I think, like political correctness, liberal media has become one of these phrases that people use. Decent, nice people like you haven't got a clue what you mean by it.
Well, let's talk about...
I can't. I'm late. I'm 2.5 minutes late for the news already. Do you want to have one more go at telling me what liberal media means?
No, I'll give you a definition of political correctness, though, if you like, because I know some people struggle with that one.
Yeah, go on, then. Well, I'm very late for the news, so make it snappy.
OK. It started off as a very polite and well-meaning attempt, and in many...
Mate, that's not snappy, sorry. It's 11:32. 2 quick thoughts in the rear-view mirror. The first, referred to by the last caller, the liberal one, the number of Muslims, British Muslims, who describe themselves as supporting jihad in that Trevor Phillips programme. The original questionnaire, I'm told by my pocket calculator, Incorrigible FCA, included the question, how do you define jihad? The overwhelming response was, it's a Muslim's personal, peaceful struggle to be more religious. So suddenly the notion that 41% of British Muslims approve of a personal, peaceful struggle to be more religious is rather different. 16% of people polled defined it as a holy war against unbelievers. So at best you're looking at, what, 41% of 16%? Or thereabouts? So it's still not good, but you can see why the headline was rather misleading.
Okay, so the final question that I want you guys to think about when you're looking at statistics is, how was the data collected? And I know this is tough because methodologies can be opaque and actually kind of boring, but there are still some simple steps you can take to check this. One poll found that 41% of Muslims in this country support jihad, which is obviously pretty scary, and it was reported everywhere in 2015. Now, when I want to check a number like that, I'll start off by finding the original questionnaire. And it turns out that journalists who reported on that statistic ignored a question lower down on the survey that asked respondents how they defined jihad. And most of them defined it as, quote, Muslims' personal, peaceful struggle to be more religious. Only 16% defined it as violent holy war against unbelievers. Now, this is the really important point. Based on those numbers, it's totally possible that no one in the survey who defined it as violent holy war also said they support it. Those two groups might not overlap at all. It's also worth asking how the survey was carried out. This was something called an opt-in poll, which means that anyone could have found it on the internet and completed it. There's no way of knowing if those people really even identified as Muslim. And finally, there were 600 respondents in that poll. There are roughly 3 million Muslims in this country, according to Pew Research Centre. That means the poll spoke to roughly 1 in every 5,000 Muslims in this country.
That survey, it was conducted by a polling organisation called Woman Trend. And Woman Trend was set up by a woman called Kellyanne Conway, who is now part of the Trump administration.
Yeah.
And so understanding the incentives that people might have behind those data gathering organisations to reach certain conclusions is really important too. And again, for any statistic, it's really important to ask, how was it gathered?
And the second thing is, if you're struggling still to grasp why I'm so keen to recognise the similarities between people that endorse, support, encourage or commit acts of terror, regardless of their background, try this on for size. On Monday morning at 10 o'clock, we'll do, is the white British community doing enough to tackle the radicalisation of people like Darren Osborne? So then you get an idea of what it must feel like to be a Muslim. The hell am I? What can I mean, I've got a job, I can do something, but if I was still working in menswear, what the hell could I do to stop people like him getting radicalised? So it's something that a couple of Muslim friends of mine have told me. I'm too busy cooking tea. I can't go out and start de-radicalising people like it's my particular problem or so that's what I want to know on Monday. What are you, as a member of the white British community, particularly if you've got a problem with Muslims, what are you doing to tackle the radicalisation of people like Darren Osborne? 11:39.